Thanks to everybody that joined us this morning. And if you weren't able to join us, thanks for joining us for this breakout session. We felt like our topic here was particularly relevant given what we have all experienced over the last number of months and beginning back in March, and the implications for response and sustained activity have likely not been greater for any organization than education, maybe healthcare perhaps. And so today we really wanted to have a chance to talk about the implications of COVID-19 and what that means today, what we can anticipate in the coming months and the next school year, and really long term, or what have we learned from this that we think may stay with us as we think about education in the future and how we support children and families and educators. And so I couldn't be more excited to have two really fabulous presenters on the screen with us today. And so let me just introduce them first. I'll start with Laura Hammack. Dr. Laura Hammack, so many of us know, as we do Chuck Johnson. She is the superintendent of Brown County Schools, a small, as we know, rural district, 1,700 students in 6 buildings that serves a pretty broad geography in Brown County. Laura has done just about everything in the realm of public schools. She's been an elementary school teacher, a 6th grade teacher, a principal, an assistant superintendent in a couple of different places. And she is now in her 5th year serving superbly as the superintendent of schools in Brown County. Officially Charles, right? Charles R. Johnson, but we just like to fondly call him Chuck. Chuck is the 22nd president of Vincennes University. Prior to serving in that role, beginning in 2015, he was also VU's provost, vice president for instruction, and dean of faculty. He has overseen a great number of programs that are relevant to us in our region and beyond, of course, and deeply engaged in work-based learning, partnerships, expansion of dual credit programs, early college partnerships, career and technical education, and one of our, I think one of our gems in the region, the Automation and Robotics Academy in Du Bois County, and in partnership with many of their key organizations. Chuck is from Washington, Indiana, and he studied at Purdue and Bowling Green and Indiana State. Laura also studied at Indiana State, but also DePauw and IU Bloomington. And so welcome, Chuck and Laura.
Thank you so much for having us. We're super excited about this conversation today, and I'm so glad to be on with Chuck.
Thank you, Tina.
Well, who wouldn't be, right, Chuck?
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, we said Chuck looks very presidential today in his office. So the world has changed for all of us, right, in the world of Zoom. But so I think everybody would just be really interested in checking in with the two of you. You know, how have things gone since March, when and maybe you guys knew things were coming before March and it wasn't as big a surprise as it seemed like, but just curious, you know, how you've responded, what things have looked like, what's it meant for your organizations and your students over the last number of months.
Well, I can say that for us, you know, March is a blur. We started off the month of March heading toward our spring break with some discussion about COVID and trying to figure out how it might impact us, if it might impact us this year, and thinking it might be something really more for this coming academic year. But like so many colleges and universities, we had to move quicker than we expected. And we were able to extend our spring break, and it gave us an extra week for our faculty to move everything online. We were able to have an orderly move out of our residence halls and maybe to make the transition to get us to the end of the semester. But it's been an uneven impact throughout that, and then throughout the start of this year. our hands-on learning courses are the ones that suffer the most. The students who learn by working directly on machines and equipment, who learn by in-person labs and clinicals, they're the ones I think that have been impacted the most. But I would also say there's been an impact on our students overall. The morale and mental health issues of our students and our faculty and staff have been impacted by this. But I think we're doing about as well as we could hope, given the circumstances.
What do numbers look like for you right now, Chuck?
We're down about 10% year over year. We lost quite a few folks at the last part of the summer. We had made the commitment in June to alter our academic calendar and to start with maybe more blended courses and try to push as much as we could to an online format so that we could thin out our labs and classrooms. But as the summer wore on and the conditions didn't seem to quite be as much under control as we expected, we ended up pushing more online. And so we had several students who at the beginning of the summer thought they were going to have more face-to-face courses, but at the end of the day found out they were taking more online. I think that caused some of them to say, maybe I'm going to take a gap year or I'm going to sit it out for a semester or two. And so it's had some impact.
Have you had any students have just said, cool, I love virtual. Thanks for going this direction?
I'm not sure those words exactly have been uttered, but we have had students who appreciated the fact that we've tried to provide some on campus and online experiences. It's just a different environment. We put a quiet phase in the start of the semester, and the first 3 weeks or so, we didn't have any real large organized student activities, which is really what we try to do at the beginning of each school year. Is we try to provide students with that introduction to connect with one another, to get a feel that they're a part of the place. And this year was just a very different experience. And we were hearing from parents that their son or their daughter felt isolated and they weren't making those kinds of connections, and that was impacting their overall experience. We started to try to make things happen a little bit more, but it is difficult because we have some limitations on how we can put people together and still not be too close together or to wear masks and things like that.
Thanks, Chuck. Laura?
Yeah, so in Brown County, as I would expect across the Uplands region, really the last 7 months here have been just so interesting to reflect on. And we've kind of unpacked it in several different phases. When this all hit in March and we ultimately were required to move to a virtual format, the first truly extraordinary piece that really erupted to the surface for the public schools across the state and across the nation is that public schools needed to serve as a site to meet the safety and health and wellness needs of the community. Not from a health perspective, but from the perspective of making sure that our families were fed. And that really ended up being one of the first pieces to our response plan, was ensuring that our families had access to meals. And what an interesting development, right? That really what we are in the business of doing is educating students, but so many of the services that we provide really came to the forefront in this crisis, sort of separate from what our initial responsibility would be. So as we transitioned to be able to make that happen, and it took us just a week to be able to have serving sites at all of our school locations, and we were able to deliver meals to any families who indicated that they were homebound. So that was an extraordinary effort that we were able to then deploy really until the beginning of the school year at the beginning of August. In the meantime, from kind of that initial meeting the needs of safety and security for families, we needed to pivot and try to figure out how to deploy our educational service model in an online format, while simultaneously in Brown County specifically meeting the challenge of 60% of our families identifying as not having enough bandwidth to be able to engage in that online format. So that was a critical piece, and we had to work quickly to solve that problem. And we were able to have an incredible collaboration with a local internet service provider. Our friends over at Mainstream Fiber were able to quickly put up some wonderful wireless access points on our school buildings so that we could do that very COVID thing of parking lot instruction, right? So families would pull up into our parking lots, and if they didn't have internet access at home, would be able to connect in that format. We also set up a sort of old school correspondence class model where families that truly could not connect in any way through those platforms picked up paper pencil packets from our schools. And truly, it was just innovation at every level to try to make it work. Because our cases in Brown County have been small enough over this crisis, we were gifted with the opportunity to spend the summer preparing for reentry into school. And as of August the 5th, our school district has been able to be all day, every day in-person instruction, which has been an incredible gift. Simultaneously, though, we have offered a 100% remote solution for families that might be presenting with concerns about being in the environment. So it's been going very well. It is extremely stressful, though, for our educators and for our families. And certainly this school year doesn't look like a school year that we have ever experienced before, but we're making it work. And it's a gift. Truly, every day that we're able to open our doors, we celebrate in this environment.
Thank
I
you,
sort of
Laura.
second that. I mean, right now we are trying to get to Thanksgiving. After Thanksgiving, we'll go back to virtual instruction to finish out the semester. And I think we're 26 days away, 26 instructional days away, and each day is a countdown. And every day you can keep doing this, it's better for our students. It's better for our ability to really reach the outcomes that we're trying to produce.
I'll take just a moment to remind everybody that Emily Meekadink from our team is monitoring chat. So if you have questions, feel free to include them in chat, and we'll get to those. I'm curious. I mean, we've seen a lot in many different places about how educators are responding to this situation, and personal current concerns and fears they have, are their deep commitment to students that sometimes conflicts with their own personal challenges. And so I'm curious if, how are you finding that your educators are responding to the situation?
Well, I think we've had a great support from our faculty. They've done a tremendous job of adjusting. We asked them to make that lift pretty quickly in March in some cases, without much of a background to be able to do it. So we did invest in training this summer, and got over 100 of our faculty to participate in some additional training to help them be more successful at virtualizing some of their courses. And I think that has been a bit of a relief to some of them. They feel better prepared coming into this. And we knew we would probably get there sooner than later because of the way things were trending. But I would say that the faculty we've done our best, I think, to try to identify those faculty perhaps who really have to teach in a face-to-face environment, and work with them to provide as safe an environment as possible, putting up barriers between equipment and making sure we have extra PPE available, and looking at different models of PPE for different types of education. But it's still been stressful because on top of everything else, they're also dealing with student engagement issues. Students some of our students just are not as engaged in the online part of the coursework. They need that face-to-face interaction to have that encouragement to be successful. So right now we're getting at the midterm, and this would have been our fall break typically, but we're soldiering on through. And I think there is some weariness that's there, and I don't think it's unusual. It's understood, but I would say for the most part, faculty have been, very much embracing the need to do this in a safe way and still maintain the integrity of the institution and what we're teaching.
I think that, Tina, your point is just spot on. I'm reflecting back on some conversations that we had this summer where educators very honestly and with sincere vulnerability just said that they were terrified and really deeply concerned about their health and well-being as we were preparing for a return to school. And I'll never forget that conversation. The word terrified is massive, right? And that is something that as an employer, we really need to take into consideration to ensure that we are then delivering a safe space that can limit that level of terror. So it was just really interesting to watch. All of our educators, really all of our staff, showed up to this thing really on a continuum, right? So there were educators and staff who had massive concerns about return to school, and there were educators and staff who were ready to come back to school yesterday, right? And so it was critically important for us as an organization, much like at Vincennes, to be able to have sincere conversations with faculty and staff to better understand their needs so that we could ultimately be responsive and create that work environment that was a little bit better than what they might have feared. And I think that all of our educators and staff would say that once we got through that very first day, that the first day was so stressful for everyone, right? But the gift of seeing our students back in our school buildings when they had not been there since March it was emotional. I think it was emotional for everyone. And it was, if you ask any of our principals, it was the best first day of school that we've ever had. It was just truly a joy to get to be there. And I think that when it all shook out, that all of the planning that we were able to do in order to prepare for that first day ensured that the first day went well and that we were just able to enjoy being together. And so moving forward, it's just super important that we don't take our eye off the ball, right? So all of these strategies that we have had in place have been working, and we need to make sure that we don't get loose with our deployment of these protocols, because we're worried about sort of post fall break. We just are coming after we're after our fall break this week, and all of us are a little concerned because we did notice that some of the strategies and structures that we were able to control in the school environment weren't there last week, and so we're a little worried about how things are going to play out on the other side of it. But being vigilant and keeping with the practices that we've been deploying with a good deal of success, we think is quite critical.
I will say one of the things, and Laura, I know you did this as well, is communication throughout the summer as things were evolving was key. We had several town halls, virtual town halls with faculty and staff to talk about how conditions were shifting or what we were doing, what the next step was, what we just learned, or how the CDC guidelines were affecting some of our planning. We had to make some pivots in a couple of cases based on how the guidance had changed. But having those conversations, I think, allowed faculty and staff to feel like that they were, first of all, being listened to and their concerns were being heard, but also that we were not just sitting here trying to impose something on them. We were really trying to look for them to be part of the solution. We had some great suggestions that came out of those.
Thank you, both of you. A couple of quick questions that we've seen come up in chat. One, Laura, a question about what advice you would have for schools that are just coming back online in person about instituting safe, socially distant culture among the student body, right? I mean, you know, how is it we encourage the fearless youth, right, to be thoughtful and careful?
Right. So it's a wonderful question, and quite honestly, it affirms exactly where we were in the summer as we were getting prepared to start this school year in person. I'll tell you what, we made mistakes in this over the last 7 months, and I think that we got some things right. But one of the things that I really am disappointed in my own self with is the fact that one of the populations that we didn't give enough credit to were the students. The students have proven to be absolutely exceptional with the deployment of the procedures. The students really get it. They are deeply interested in what has gone on in their world over the last 7 months, and they have researched and they've paid attention, and they understand that these protocols are important for them to be able to be in session. We were so worried about mask wearing and that the students would not do it, right? And just sort of dig in and not. But I think that they understand the correlation that if I wear my mask, then I get to come to school. And then that whole cycle of appreciation for being in the space it's just different. And so I guess my advice there is don't discount the students. They will rise to the occasion. But make sure that you have the systems in place so that they can show up and be able to just fall into the patterns that you have created. Kind of like cleaning my house. I like to make my house clean, and my husband just sort of like follows my rules, right? So we tried to get our schools created so that the students would just follow the rules that are in place. Everything looks very, very different this year. We have added lunch period, so that we have less students together in a space. We have traffic patterns in our buildings that we have never had before. We are doing period changes at different times. So 7th graders are going before 8th graders are going, right? Some things that, quite honestly, we don't think that we'll ever go back to because they're going so well. But having those structures in place from day one really proved to be able to position us in that level where we could say that that first day was a success. So don't discount the kids, but make sure the systems are in place. And I think that you'll be very, very happy with what you see on the other side.
Thank you. That's really encouraging, Laura. Hey, Chuck, a question that I think would be great for you about how you're leveraging community and industry partnerships to provide college, career, and life readiness opportunities to students. I know it's a big concern we have right now. You even mentioned it, right? Some of the issues around those hands-on and experiential learning opportunities. Just curious how you're thinking about that and addressing it.
Well, one of the things I have to say, and it's not directly related to that, is that our industry partners were very beneficial to our planning because we were learning from resources that they could access in terms of information. In one case, Kimball International was able to acquire for us some masks, face shields that they were making, that they provided to us that were very useful to us. And our industry partners just were really part of helping us find the solutions because for them, this was about their talent pipeline and making sure that they were able to keep building that. We've been very transparent and tried to keep the communication lines open with all of our partners about what they needed to do. We've tried to manage expectations, coordinate plans for things when we have positive cases and how that impacts our respective situations. For example, we had a student in our AMT program with Southwest Indiana Fame who lives in one of our residence hall, who's a primary contact. And our protocol was to isolate them or quarantine them for 14 days. It was a little bit different than their employer's protocol had been at that time. We coordinated to make sure that we were unifying our messaging there and making sure that we were able to take care of that. But at the same time, we're looking at continuing to look post-pandemic as to what those needs are and making sure we don't drop the ball. Recruiting is happening for all of these partnerships right now. We're expanding our partnerships. In the midst of this, we launched a new apprenticeship program with Amazon on our Vincennes campus, and first one in the country to do it. We postponed it by about 6 weeks. We got started in May, and they're already looking to double the numbers next year to 600 a year, starting in mid-21. And so that's been an exciting thing to know that our partners still have a need for talent and they still want to work with us, and they've adapted with us and incorporated some of the same safety concerns and health protocols that we are trying to reinforce. And I'd say the final thing has just been seeing that everyone wants to see us get through this in the right way and be able to have a strong economy at the back end. And I feel like that's a unifying vision for everybody.
And how have you seen those same things apply? I know you've worked so much with CTE and with K12 schools. What are the implications here? I know, Laura, you can talk about Eagle Manufacturing and how that's continuing to create opportunities for students, but sort of curious about the high school lens on this as well.
Well, in our case, we see there's a real vulnerability here for all the reasons Laura talks about in terms of access to broadband. At the same time, we just can't replicate some of the environment we have in those labs. And so we've actually received a $1.5 million grant from the year funds from the governor to help us figure out how to virtualize some of the aspects of this training that can be delivered maybe away from the lab or the classroom environment when need be, which we think actually has some potential longer term applications and benefits for distributing that kind of education beyond career centers so that we can get more students into the pipeline by virtualizing that. And we're hoping to have that rolled out in 21-22 so that we can start to see how we can build on that model.
Certainly at the high school level, Tina, you mentioned our program, which is Eagle Manufacturing. For any of our viewers that were able to participate in the earlier session today, there are student manufacturing businesses and other student-run businesses happening across our region, and it is just inspiring to see. A very interesting alignment with Eagle Manufacturing and this whole COVID situation has been that Eagle Manufacturing, we really credit as being one of the reasons why we were able to open on time. They were identified by our state government as an essential service, and throughout the summer worked to create PPE for not just our organization, but other organizations in the Uplands region, and positioned us to be able to not have those supply chain issues that some other school districts really experienced, and ultimately weren't even able to open on time. So it was just a really cool connection, I think, for our students who were in that real world experience of needing to show up to work, needing to get their temperature taken, working in a masked environment, and then ultimately needing to deploy that contact tracing process. It was a really incredible, not planned, but really hands-on experience for our students to not only kind of work in an extraordinarily challenging environment, but then also to give sincere value back to their community and to really understand the why behind manufacturing work and why that work is so critical to a community. I think it also has provided, and Chuck, you just mentioned how important those lab settings are, that we can transition a lot virtually, and we are, but there are also magnificent experiences that can only be replicated in person, right? And so how might we, sort of using that design thinking protocol, how might we be prototyping right now to try to figure this out so that there are hybrid models for in-person as well as virtual instruction, and so that we can kind of get that perfect balance and then ultimately deploy it in a way that prepares our students for their next step.
Laura, just a quick question for you.
Yeah.
You have been able to open on a timely basis, and you were able to sustain some programming over the summer. Did you see that? Were you attracting students from other places, from other districts that, found that those opportunities just weren't available to them in their own communities?
So we did. And this is, we certainly don't celebrate the fact that we were able to recruit and retain some students from other public school districts, because we are all in a position where every student, every heartbeat matters when it comes to our bottom line. But since we were able to open on August the 5th, the in-person environment, I think, was extraordinarily appealing to some families, right? And so families that were able to actually deploy transportation over to Brown County reached out, and we were able to make that happen. So we have witnessed students from kindergarten through the 12th grade that have enrolled in Brown County schools as a result of our ability to be open early. But we say that not with pride or not with esteem, but that we are grateful, right, for the opportunity to serve those students, and that sometimes small rural can really come to the forefront and can be a position of strength, right? So it's a balance, and we have been gifted to be able to educate those students, but we also recognize that if they ultimately choose to return to their home school, that we just hope that they stay in the Uplands region, right?
Well, and in fairness, right, there are some families that just needed a place for their children to go.
Yes.
I think one of the biggest challenges we've tried to face is the fact that we are not really set up to care for children that are 6 years old to 12-year-old, at any time during the year except for summer.
Right.
And so there probably were families that really needed something different at different times. And so no criticism to folks that needed to make a different choice for their families, for sure. Okay, I'd really like to pivot here for a minute and to begin looking forward a little bit more. So Chuck has very eloquently said, they're counting down their 26 days until they go virtual again over the holidays. And that will give everybody a little breathing time, right? And to think about the second semester. But I'm sure curious now, how do you begin thinking about next semester and even more about next school year? There are still many unknowns. And so what do you anticipate? How do vaccines fit into this whole equation, or do they not matter in terms of how you're planning? Just curious how you're thinking about what comes next for education.
As far as next semester, I think we're going to see more of the same. We have intentionally altered our calendar for spring for that reason, to give ourselves an extended time frame where students are away from campuses. And we won't resume face-to-face instruction until February 1st. So we'll have a nine-week break between face-to-face instruction in November and when we resume it again. But I think we'll see some of the same issues, and we may see some fall off of students who this semester just wasn't as successful or as fun as they wanted it to be, and they may decide to sit it out until we can get back to a more normal environment. Going forward, I think we just have to plan kind of parallel tracks, right? We have to kind of assume there's going to be some of the same type of issues that we're going to have to address. Can't count on the vaccine being available or being widely implemented. And so I think we're going to have to plan for this to be a real possibility, and then probably hopefully go the opposite direction of what we did this year, which is rather than ratcheting toward the situation where we might have to go more virtual, maybe start going to less virtual as we start to get more control over the situation and we can start ramping it back up again. That at least would be my hope.
For our K12 experience as well, we're using the metaphor right now of kind of feeling like we are in a season of pruning. Many times with a tree or a shrub, right? If you lop off a dead branch, then it inspires new growth. Or you can even change the direction of that tree or shrub, right? Just based on that pruning season. It's an odd idea because you're sort of lopping off a part of something that you would ultimately want to grow. But for us, we're really in that mode of pausing, sort of noticing what's working well right now, and then also really identifying what we miss and we can't wait to get back to. So in our district, we are really being planful in sort of two modes. First, there is no, it is absolutely the case that we are still sort of learning today what we need to deploy for tomorrow. We do know that for some reason, particularly with younger students, there is not as much transmission as once was initially feared, right? So we're trying to still better understand the health and the science behind what's actually happening so that we can be more planful. We have worry, we have concern about what this flu season is going to present and how that might translate in the K-12 setting, and if that might inform that we need to shift from this green level of implementation that we've been able to be in to our yellow level, or ultimately the red zone, which is a full closure and 100% transition to remote. But we are trying to take a moment, once we have now really been to the position of being able to settle in, to sort of analyze opportunity in this situation and what might we be able to maximize on now that certain experiences are normalized. You know, here we are having a virtual conference on Zoom, something that 7 months ago, none of us would have been able to navigate. And now we have kindergarten students who can jump on a Zoom call with their teacher and navigate a lesson. So there are truly takeaways to this experience that I don't expect will ever not be a part of our programming. But we're really trying to be thoughtful about what is working, what's working well, what's not working so well. And we also just can't wait to get back on the other side of some of the experiences that we've unfortunately needed to pull away from students that are a part of our community traditions and experiences that students should have the opportunity to get to do.
Well, what do you feel like people talk about COVID fatigue, right? And we're always looking just a little farther out, hoping that this is just a little bit longer. But, you know, how are we feeling about that second semester in the beginning of next year, if you feel like you're continuing in that type of environment? And what do you anticipate in terms of that potential fatigue component?
Well, I think we anticipate that may be the case. We're trying to do something very similar. We're going to create a more compact face-to-face environment and not have the traditional spring break. And that is certainly something that we expect will have, I think, a bit of an impact on people's mental health as we get toward that middle of the semester period. But our hope is that we can maybe give them a short spell or two And I think the other thing is I'm as much concerned about our faculty as I am our students. I'm concerned about our staff as I am our students. We've had people working remotely for quite a bit, but we started going back to more face-to-face environment. And there are some individuals who frankly have been working in a face-to-face environment the whole way. There was no way for them to do their jobs remotely. And I think about all of our physical plant folks who've kept our facilities cleaned and protected and all the things that we're doing to make sure we're disinfecting. And I think those individuals I'm just as much concerned about as I am the individuals who are in the classroom or the labs. So I think it's going to be a situation where we're all there. We all have to recognize it. If we can find ways to alleviate it, we'll probably give a little extra time off right at the holiday period from what we normally do, because we can't have our normal holiday type of gatherings and things at the end of the year. So we'll probably give folks a little extra time away, a little bit of a gesture here and there. I think that will be appreciated. But it's also the truth that I'm concerned because we're going into another budget year for the state, and a lot of the concerns about what funding looks like for the future. So far, we have been very fortunate. We have not had to make any sort of staff reductions due to COVID pandemic impacts on our budgets. We've taken hits, but we've been able to sustain those. But I can't guarantee that another round or two of state cuts won't produce some of those kinds of concerns. We're committed to trying to deliver on our mission. I think we can't cut our way to success, but I know that's on the minds of a lot of folks, that economic insecurity that might follow if we aren't able to keep them employed. But we've made every effort to try to stay to that commitment as much as we possibly can.
Chuck, I affirm everything that you just said. The fatigue that our teachers and staff are experiencing is real. They are so, the word exhausted just keeps getting used, and I feel like that word isn't normally used in a school year until like November, late November, right before the holidays, and folks are truly exhausted. And I think that they are just spent on managing not only that in-person experience, but then we have students that are onboarding and offboarding if they are presenting with symptoms of COVID-19, right, and need to go through experiences where then they might be participating remotely and then reintroduced in that in-person environment. And that's a lot for an educator to bear. It's hard enough to be a teacher or work in the school environment on a 70-degree day when sunny, when you don't have COVID running around. But wow, this has just been that extra weight that it has been really hard to watch our folks have to navigate. And I echo your concern. We unfortunately in our school district have realized a drop in our student enrollment this year of 100 students. And for a district our size, that impact to our bottom line is massive. As a result, it's on the minds of all of us, right? And so we have to be responsive, but we also have to ask the question, how much of this is COVID related? How many of these students will we be able to witness back next year? Are there decisions that we can make in the short term that could ultimately bridge us to a position that we might normally be in? But yeah, all of this is on our minds, and then that just adds an extra layer to showing up to work with just more. And when your service is in delivery to students or to young adults or to adults like at Vincennes, you have to show up every day and be your best self, because that's what your students deserve. So that's a lot. And self-care and taking care of one's own mental health and wellness are critical. And I'll be very transparent. I don't think we figured it out yet. That's a piece to this that we are still unpacking, and we've got to get it right.
Well, I will agree with you. I don't like to admit it, but I can't say with any certainty as to exactly how the future will unfold. I just know that we have to figure out a way to do our best and to keep people in the loop as much as we possibly can. It sounds like you've been doing that, and I think that's the only way we get people's trust that they're not in this alone, that they're not bearing these burdens on their own. And I do believe that in some ways this has tightened our community, it's enhanced our community, but it does create some different stresses for people that when they're dealing with their own family situations or their own economic situations at home or their children or their own health situations. And I think that's been part of the unknown. It's like we think, okay, if I can hold on for 6 weeks or 10 weeks or 12 weeks and get through this, but with the uncertainty about when that point of getting through will be, is adding, I think, to some of the fatigue.
Agree.
So what are the supports that you need? I mean, what could communities, or maybe even more importantly, what could the state do? You know, what is it that can be done? What is it that you need to sustain your organizations, to support your children and your families and your educators? You know, I know you both have thoughts.
Well, I would say the state of Indiana, partly because of our strong fiscal position, has been as well prepared to weather this as anyone. And certainly the CARES Act money that has come through the state is being deployed to support education, both at the K-12 and the higher education level. There's a lot of focus on how do we leverage our next level jobs programs that certainly Vincennes and Ivy Tech are key partners with. And I see that they're doing their best, not to necessarily prop up our institutions, but because they see this as a moment in time to take us and maybe take us to another level with some of these programs. And at the same time, because we don't want to have that lack of continuity in our missions. We can't afford to have a year or two lost of progress in our education system. We've got to make sure we're maintaining it because our economy needs those employees who are going to be prepared for the workforce. And so I think the state of Indiana is actually doing a pretty good job with the resources they have. I am, concerned that when the CARES Act money runs out, or when we reach another point, if the state revenues are not maybe where we want them to be, we may have to absorb some more hits. But I think the state of Indiana has done its best, especially to shield, I think, K-12 education, and to a degree as much as they can, higher ed as well.
So well said again, Chuck. The K-12 funding formula is the primary factor in its calculus is student enrollment, right? And so when we are facing an enrollment decline, as are most school districts across the state due to this virus, but then also due to other demographic shifts, we need to be responsive to that. I would like for our state agencies to be considering the role that the COVID virus is playing in our operations. Sincerely, this is a very expensive problem. I will never forget when we were initially planning for return to school and we were looking at some pricing structures for hand sanitizer. I about fell off my chair when 1 gallon of hand sanitizer was priced in at $56 a gallon, and you had to buy a pump, which was an additional $6. And so replicating out how many gallons of hand sanitizer that we needed just to have in place for every single classroom across this county was crazy. I'm a shopper. I enjoy shopping, but not that kind of shopping. So we had to really stop and just say, whoa, this is massive. So the CARES funding the CARES funding allowed for us to position ourselves to be able to open. But here it is mid-October and those resources are almost gone. And so our big question is what's next, right? So we have declining enrollment, which would ultimately witness a lower dollar amount that we would receive on a monthly basis. And we have limited supplies for making sure that we have safe and secure buildings. So I would ask that it is considered that there is funding for K-12 and for higher ed that is pre-COVID potentially for a year so that we can get through this extraordinarily challenging environment in a way that still allows for us to be in session. That's our absolute #1 priority, is to make sure that our students are being served all day, every day, but we need to do it in an environment that is safe and healthy and as well for the people that are there. And I feel for our state right now. I've seen their forecasts and I've seen, what our state legislators are looking at when they ultimately are going to prepare their budget for 21 and 22, and they don't have much to work with. So this is a bigger issue than just, what we can do locally and what we as a state agency can do. I think it's a broader conversation that needs to be held, and it needs to be done soon. And it doesn't seem like we're getting there. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, I agree with you. I think, one of the shocks that we had was as everyone was going out looking in the same places for hand sanitizer and masks and other resources, we were all bidding against each other and having some issues. And so perhaps some going forward, if these are going to continue to be the norm for how we operate, maybe some additional procurement opportunities or a way for us to go out with a single bid for the state of Indiana or something like that would be helpful. But when it was kind of all for one or all for each other ourselves, it was a little bit more of a challenging environment for sourcing a lot of that equipment and PPE.
Absolutely.
Thanks to both of you. I really appreciate your forthright responses to that. You know, there are some things that aren't sort of tracking in the way that we might traditionally expect them. And, you know, one of them has to do with post-secondary enrollment and what generally happens in times of economic downturn or hardship, especially in times of high unemployment. And we certainly are seeing, we have some of the counties with the highest unemployment in the state of Indiana right here in our region, and those with the lowest as well, right? And so, you know, a lot's been written, Chuck, that you know, that we aren't seeing the influx of people into post-secondary, into Ivy Tucks and Vincennes type situations that we did say in the Great Recession, right? So I'm curious how you process that. If you think that's a short-term reaction, you know, many people believe we're going to start seeing some of those jobs that where people were temporarily unemployed may now become permanently employed. Just would love to hear how you're thinking about all of that. Just an easy question.
Every day, just about every waking hour, I'm thinking about all that. We expected, given the prolonged unemployment that occurred throughout the summer, we expected a bit of a summer bump. Actually, as July went into August, that we might see a late surge, and we were preparing for that in some of our systems. Unfortunately, it didn't materialize, in part because we lost a lot of folks at the end of the summer that we hadn't anticipated losing. In part because I think people are still thinking this is a temporary blip. And I think as a state, we're down at around the 6.5 or 7% unemployment. So we're not quite where we were, certainly not humming on all cylinders, but we are hitting pretty well in major sectors. And so I think that some of the relief from the CARES Act might have kept some people on the sidelines a little bit longer, trying to determine what their plans ought to be. Certainly, we know that the switch to maybe less traditional instruction in some cases kept some people away that might have otherwise come in. And I do think there's still legitimately understanding there are still people who are just concerned about what the environment's going to be like on a college campus when you can't have the normal activities like you normally would, that it's not the same kind of experience for them. But I do think that either we will see a recovery and we will see then that typical surge in post-secondary enrollment not materialize in the same way, or we will see that there will be an opportunity for continued unemployment that will translate into enrollment. And I think it may be sector related too. I certainly know the hospitality and travel sectors are disproportionately impacted by what's been going on. And there may be folks coming from those sectors that will be looking for post-secondary opportunities to move into other industry sectors. But so far we haven't seen any major influx. Our aviation programs in Indianapolis are still actually very robust. And while we aren't going to see maybe the immediate impact of a 10,000 pilot shortage that we thought we might see in the next 5 years. It may be 7 years out now instead of 5 years out. And eventually we will get back to some sense of normalcy. And our hope is that we, again, don't have this gap for the workforce, that we'll be prepared to meet the needs of the employers.
Yeah. Thank you, Chuck. I mean, you're correct, right? Our counties that are struggling the most are those that are focused on hospitality, Orange County in particular, and we heard today, right, that our other sectors are in many cases doing well and still in adding employees. But we do know that some of our entrepreneurs are finding themselves in a different environment, some of our restaurant owners, and certainly those working in hospitality. So I guess it's something we will all have to keep our eyes on and see if there are programs in particular that we'll need to develop. But it's going to depend a lot on what type of support continues to come down the pike for folks that are in difficult situations. You made a comment, Chuck, about the sense of normalcy. And I am curious what the new normal will look like. So when we think beyond this year or even the next year, Are there things that are occurring now that we think are going to change what normal looks like in the future in the realm of education? And what might those be? And are those something that we should applaud or fear?
Laura, do you want to take that one first?
No, no, I don't. No, I'm happy to. That is a big question. It's a heavy question, and it is certainly something that kind of in that pruning process that metaphor that we've been using. I think that is what has been on our minds. So we certainly see that in the future of pre-K through 12 and even adult education, that some sort of simultaneous remote option is going to be our new normal. We do not envision a time when we just sort of pulled back to 100% in person and everyone else, just sort of sorry. What has been interesting to watch is that there are some learners that thrive in the remote setting for a variety of reasons. And then there are certainly those learners more that thrive in the ability to be with other learners and to be educated in person by their educators. So we are in that process of trying to ideate what this might look like when we are on the other side of the virus and providing options for families. We are in a world when on-demand everything is the expectation. And quite frankly, pre-K through 12 traditional public education has just not been headed in that very same direction. Our structures look a lot alike to what they used to look like. And really, it's been the innovation with our engagement with ROI that has inspired us to think differently about what K-12 education needs to look like. It needs to look like much more hands-on. It needs to be relevant. Our students, they are so stinking smart. They'll see right through us every time. If what we're asking them to do has no relevance to their life, they're done and they're not engaged, and they are looking for something that is, much more interesting, which might not be us. So we are in a situation where we need to be preparing our school days for engagement. We need to be thinking about ways early that students are connected to career mindset. So that relevance piece is massive there. We've kind of abandoned the concept of college and career readiness lately, and we're adopting the notion of career connected learning so that we can make the K-12 experience one for our students that career is always the foundation of what students are thinking about. So instead of being an algebra class and saying, why do I need to do the Pythagorean theorem, right? We can actually have relevance to a career connection for students to sort of evidence the why behind this work. We are just looking at ways in which this world, this platform of Zoom and the ability to connect to our industry partners, not only in the region, but across the nation and across the world, can bring more diversity and equity and inclusion to our community. That is one that is pretty alike, right? We need more experiences for our students to see that the world outside of Brown County is diverse, it is beautiful, and that all individuals present with gifts and talents that we can all learn from and be inspired by. So we look to use these platforms as tools, but not to ever replace the value of an educator. I think another thing that this whole experience has affirmed is the fact that our educators in a profession that for whatever reason over the last years has been not necessarily elevated, we're instantly elevated to a position of need and appreciation and honor, which they should be. So I'm really hoping that on the other side of this, that communities will step away and even more so say, gosh, couldn't do this without a teacher, right? And we're so grateful to them for that. So covered a lot there, Tina, sorry, but
You did.
Passionate.
There are a lot of things going on there. I would agree with all of that. I think one of the things I see that the pandemic has done is it's accelerated some trends that perhaps were happening more glacially or were happening in pockets, and now it's accelerating trends in education and in industry. I think we will see growth in automation in many of our sectors where it had been going on a little bit more gradually before. It'll raise the potential, which has implications both for employment, but also has real implications for the type of employment that will be there. And I think there'll be growing demand for those technician level folks, the individuals who are able to do the programming and keep the robots running and design the systems and things like that. And so that has implications for how we teach and what we teach. I think the second thing we're going to see is with, as Laura had said, with our use of Zoom and our use of virtual type instruction, it's now raised the bar on what we require to happen in face, right? In a face-to-face environment, if I'm going to watch somebody write on a board and talk, I can do that better on a Zoom or on a recorded lecture, or stop it and go get a bag of chips and come back and watch it later, or watch it 3 times. So when we require people to be physically present with us and give up time that they could be spending with family, friends, or job, or whatever, that needs to be the highest value educational experience that we can provide. And so it raises the bar on what we do when we require people to be physically present. And then I think the third thing we're going to see is an acceleration, unfortunately, of the financial pressures on many of the smaller private institutions out there in higher education who are so tuition dependent and who have already been teetering in some cases. And we may see more mergers of smaller institutions, or we may see many of them perhaps go out of existence. And that's a real shame for the diversity of the environment of higher education, but I think it's an unfortunate reality. Certainly one of the things I expect is we're going to see more partnership models, because we're going to be able to depend more on one another to take different pieces. And much of what Laura's doing in Brown County and what we're doing in Du Bois County with our partners and our K12 organizations and industry partners to create work-based learning experiences that go from high school through the associate degree track. And we also then do education for the workers in real time. And maybe more of that will be delivered through a combination of desktop and bringing them to campus for training in our labs and things. So I think there's real opportunity here, and there'll be some real positive things that will come out of this experience, but there'll be some short-term pressures that maybe will make it difficult for us to get over this without some casualties, I'm afraid.
Thank you to both of you for answering a difficult question. We have just a couple of minutes left, and I just want to give you both the opportunity to make any closing comments. I don't know if you have a story you'd like to share with us, a student you'd like to tell us about, or anything that you feel like would be just the right way to end this session today.
I'm happy to tell you all about one of our graduates from the class of 2020. The class of 2020 was a group of students that really were robbed of lots of the experiences that students just work really their entire educational careers to enjoy, right? The prom, a traditional graduation. But one of our students, Chloe, she's an extraordinary young woman. She's actually at Purdue now and is studying engineering. It's just a vision that I have that will be seared into my memory. As I reflect back on COVID, I'm just never going to forget this. She is a student who did not have internet access at home. One day I was rolling up to the high school to help with the meal distribution that day. And there was Chloe sitting on the front porch of Brown County High School with a chair and a desk from inside. Of course, the students weren't allowed inside the facility at that point, accessing the internet and making sure that she was taking her AP exams. So she was literally taking her AP exams, front porch, Brown County High School, with a blanket around because it was a little chilly that day, sitting in the sunshine. And I'll tell you what, that is the resilient spirit that I think that of all of the unfortunate components to this virus and all of the frustrations that we have been experiencing, Chloe figured it out, and so did the majority of our students. And for those that haven't, we're still working on making sure that that'll happen for them. So I think that we're going to be okay. I know that we're going to be okay. It's just going to be hard for a minute, but when we've got kids like Chloe that are going to sort of be the ones that we pass the torch to, we're going to be just fine.
I don't have as eloquent a story as Laura has, but I have a situation that I experienced a couple of weeks ago that kind of illustrates a point that Laura made earlier about the students seem to be grateful for the opportunity. I have a habit of walking the campus and thanking students for wearing their masks and staying socially distant to try to reinforce those behaviors. And I was in our library the other day and walked up, and there was a young woman studying all by herself with her mask on, very intensely focusing on her nursing courses. And I thanked her for wearing her mask. I said, I know this is probably difficult and it's probably not what you expected. And she said, you know, I realize it, but this is so important because I wouldn't be able to do it if I couldn't be here. And I really thank the university for trying to make this possible for us. And I know we've got to do this and we'll get through it together. And that really does, I think, epitomize what I've been seeing from our students, from our faculty, from our staff, from everybody involved in this, is that people recognize this is not what we want it to be, but we're making it what we have to make it to be to make it, to get us through it. And I couldn't be happier and more proud of the people I work with every day to deliver the education and fulfill our mission. So it's been truly a very fulfilling experience, exhausting at times, as Laura said, but very fulfilling.
Well, I want to thank both of you. It's such a pleasure for me to be able to work with both of you, and both these folks serve on the ROI board, and you can see how meaningful their perspective and participation is to us as we think about how to support this region. Laura and Chuck, gosh, thank you. I mean, one of the things I regret about this format is there's no way for you to get a round of applause or to see the smiling faces or the nods from so many people that heard what you said, really heard what you said, and have their own experiences. And everyone on this call probably also had an experience they could have shared with us. And I guess if there's something we take from this experience, is it something that we're all addressing together. We each have a role to play in addressing it. And but gosh, how thankful we are that the two of you are leaders of educational institutions in our region. And again, reminders of why we will find a way to continue to be a region that is still on the way up. So everybody, thank you for being part of this. I encourage you to you now can take a 22-minute break before our very final session, which is going to be exciting, when we are going to award our Regional Innovation Awards. So again, go back to your email that you got this morning or yesterday. It will have the link that you need to follow for that final session this afternoon. And again, thanks for being with us, and my deepest appreciation, Laura and Chuck.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day.